Those of us in this country currently are engaged in what has come to be one of the most bitter of all possible controversies. And that controversy basically centers around the matter of our origin. How do we answer questions such as, whence have we come? How did we get here? What is our ultimate origin? Part of the reason for the controversy, both in this country and in many others, that surrounds those kinds of questions has to do with the available options that we can use to answer such questions. Here is one of those options. We in science refer to it simply as the evolution model. You may have heard it called simply evolution or the theory of evolution. The evolution model basically says this: the universe is self-contained. That is to say, there is nothing outside the universe that has caused the universe to come into being. The universe and everything within it, all living, all non-living systems alike, are here as the result of a long, blind, meandering, chance, random process occurring over eons and eons of time in nature. In other words, there is no first cause uncaused. There is no superintending intelligence. There is no divine guidance that is responsible for you having been here tonight or for anybody else having been any other place at any other time. To use the words of the late eminent evolutionist of Harvard University, Dr. George Gaylord Simpson, you are an accident in a universe that did not have you in mind in the first place. Down through the years, those who have styled themselves as evolutionists have done a very admirable job both in defining and defending their theory. A number of years ago, the renowned scientist from Great Britain, Dr. George Kirkut, published a small but a very powerful book called The Implications of Evolution. And in that volume, Dr. Kirkut defined evolution with these words. He said, on the other hand, there is the theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. This theory, he said, can be called the general theory of evolution. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're here all weekend long to discuss. What we in science routinely refer to as the general theory of evolution. Now, granted, we don't most of the time go around calling it by that long and fancy moniker. We simply call it evolution. You may have heard it referred to as the theory of evolution or organic evolution. This is the old amoeba to man, matter to man, molecules to man evolution that you've heard so much about. But you'll notice that as Dr. Kirkut began his sentence, he did so with these first few words. On the other hand, as if possibly he were comparing the general theory of evolution to something else. That's exactly what he was doing. I'd like to mention to you this evening what it was that he was comparing it to. You see, there is not just one single theory of evolution. There actually are at least two different, very important theories. One of them, the general theory, we're going to have a whole lot to say about this weekend. The other one, we're going to have little to nothing to say about. In fact, my comments here will be the only time we address it. And the simple reason is because there is no controversy over that second theory of evolution. Dr. Kirkut called it, and this is the name we still use today, 39 years later, the special theory of evolution. The special theory of evolution basically says this. Yes, things can and often do change. But those changes always take place within very narrow, very restricted limits. Let me give you some examples this evening with which I suspect many of you in here already are familiar. You probably know that years and years ago, we did not have any such thing as Brangus cattle. But today we do. And years ago, those of us who work in veterinary medicine didn't have to worry about some lady walking into our clinic one afternoon with a peekapoo dog tucked under her arm. There was no such thing as a peekapoo dog. But there is today. And years ago, you gentlemen sitting in the auditorium who have a wife or a sweetheart, the day before Valentine's Day, you couldn't go rushing in a panic down to the local florist shop and order up one of any of over 1,300 varieties of roses. But today you can. Why is it all of these things are true today when in fact they did not used to be true? Well, the simple answer to that question is this. Because there's been a lot of evolution going on. But you and I both recognize, do we not? It's not this kind of evolution. It's not what Dr. Kirkut called the general theory. Ladies and gentlemen, this falls under the category of what he called the special theory of evolution. How did we get Brangus cattle? We used our knowledge of genetics and crossbreeding to breed a Brahma with an Angus, and we got out a Brangus. And how did we get all those varieties of roses? Well, we learned that we could crossbreed one kind of rose with another kind of rose and get still a third rose, and so on. And how did we get the peekapoo dog? We learned that you could breed a Pekingese with a poodle and get a peekapoo. You can breed a Cocker Spaniel with a poodle and get a cockapoo. We can get you a lot of poos. But is the Brangus still a member of the cattle group? Yes. And is the peekapoo, is the cockapoo still a dog? Yes. And we all know, do we not, that a rose, by any other name, is still a rose? Friends, nobody among us denies the fact of the special theory of evolution. We see that around us every day. In fact, that is the correct use of the word evolution. It comes from the Latin word evolvere, which simply means to change. Has there been a lot of visible change within the dog group? Yes. Within the cattle group? Yes. Within the rose group? Yes. But ladies and gentlemen, those changes did not cause one of those animals or plants to go into anything more than what it already was. In other words, we say in biology that phylogenetic boundaries have been respected, not traversed or violated. In other words, cattle still gave rise to cattle, roses to roses, and dogs to dogs. There is none among us who denies that kind of change going on in nature. That's not what is causing the controversy. What's causing the controversy is this one. Dr. Simpson, whom I quoted earlier from Harvard University, gave this definition of evolution. He said evolution is a fully natural process, inherent, that is built into the physical properties of the universe, by which life arose in the first place and by which all living things, past or present, have since developed divergently and progressively. Now, you may wonder, as you look at that transparency and see the date of 1960 on it, why would I employ this evening a definition for a theory that now is 39 years old? I do so for two reasons. Number one, during his lifetime, Dr. Simpson was probably the most eminent evolutionist alive. In fact, he was affectionately known in the scientific community as Mr. Evolution. He had taught more, written more, spoken more in evolution than any man living. And secondly, to be quite honest, in all of my years of research, I have never found a definition that was any better. Look how succinct it is, and yet how all-encompassing it is. First, Dr. Simpson said, evolution is a fully natural process. By definition, isn't it true that that then rules out anything supernatural? If it's fully natural, doesn't that rule out the supernatural by definition? Yes. Secondly, Dr. Simpson said, it is by this fully natural process that all life started. Something non-living and inorganic had to give rise to something living and organic. And once that occurred naturalistically, Dr. Simpson said life then progressed two ways. Divergently, spreading out, and progressively, becoming increasingly more complex in its genetic makeup. And ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what the general theory of evolution teaches. And that is what the controversy is all about. For while this may be, in some quarters, scientific quarters especially, a very popular theory as to how we got here, it is by no means the only explanation as to how we got here. There is a second model that we in science refer to simply as the creation model. According to the creation model, the universe is not self-contained. That is to say, this universe didn't cause itself. Something from outside the universe actually caused this universe to come into being. A supernatural creator, using processes that are no longer in operation, made this universe and everything within it, all living, all non-living systems alike. Does the creation model allow for change within groups? Yes. Does the creation model allow for change between, among, beyond groups? No. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where the controversy is. I would suggest to you tonight, it does not take a doctor's degree in Aristotelian logic to figure out. These two models are not alike. One of them, the evolution model, says the universe is all that exists. Period. There is nothing outside this universe. The late Dr. Carl Sagan, Cornell University astronomer and evolutionist, in introducing his very popular Cosmos public television series and his book by the same name, made this observation. He said, the cosmos is all that there ever was, is, or ever will be. Period. The creation model says that is not true. That while this universe exists, there is something outside this universe that caused the universe to come into being. The evolution model says everything you see around you, all living and non-living systems alike, happen to be here as the result of blind, random, chance, non-propulsive, accidental forces occurring in nature over eons of time. The creation model says that is not true. That you, the other systems on this earth, are not here by accident. But you were specially designed by a creator to inhabit this earth. Friends, one thing this evening is absolutely certain from just a cursory examination of the two models. They cannot both be correct. They're teaching diametrically opposed, mutually exclusive concepts. The question becomes then, which one is correct? And that's what the lecture tonight and all the lectures tomorrow are about. I would like to show you some of the latest scientific evidence that will help you to decide which of these two models, which of these two cosmogonies or world views is correct. They both cannot be correct. The statement that I'm about to make to you as I introduce the lecture may shock some of you, but I have come tonight prepared to back it up with the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, much of the controversy that we're experiencing in this country today, and that is going on in many other countries around the world as well, is not being caused merely or solely by those of us who are creationists. Quite the opposite. It's being caused by some within the evolutionary community who have, within the scientific literature over the last decade and a half, come to the forefront to plainly state in words that cannot be misunderstood this: The evidence does not seem to fit the theory of evolution like we once thought that it did. This controversy that shows that there are cracks in the evolutionary foundation started in the year 1980. In the May 1980 issue of a refereed science journal by the name of Physics Bulletin, a British physicist and evolutionist by the name of Dr. H.S. Lipson wrote an article titled "A Physicist Looks at Evolution." And as he began his article, Dr. Lipson said that he had always had an interest in life's origin and subsequent development. But he quickly went on to tell the reader, right up front, that he had never had any kind of association with either creationists or their dogma of creationism. As one who works in this controversy on a daily basis, let me assure you tonight, he is telling you the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lipson has been one of the most stern opponents that creation has ever had. And he has been one of the most outspoken proponents that evolution has ever had. He has never been a friend of creationism. And that's why the statements that he made in this particular article in the scientific literature struck everybody, including his own colleagues, so oddly. Dr. Lipson in this article made this observation. He said, in fact, evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it. And many, he said, are prepared to bend their observations to fit in with it. I suggest to you tonight there isn't anybody in the scientific community who's going to take that kind of a statement lightly. And I'll tell you why. Folks, our English word science derives from the Latin term scientia, meaning knowledge. We as scientists are supposed to be people who wear blinders. And outside those blinders lie words in which we are to have absolutely no interest. Words that represent concepts like bigotry, bias, subjectivity, prejudice, preconceived ideas. We're not interested in those things. We're supposed to be people who are on a search for knowledge, the facts, the objective truth of the matter. Oh, Dr. Lipson says, indeed. That's exactly how good science is supposed to work. Unfortunately, he says, that is not how it's working. Not when it comes to evolution. He said, we've taken evolution, and behind your back, without your knowledge or your permission, we've trained this thing to become our own private little religion. And more than that, he says, in order to foster the religion, in order to make it palatable to the masses without you knowing it, without any lights blaring or flags waving or bells clanging, we had to bend the facts to fit in with the theory. If we didn't, they wouldn't fit any other way. Friends, that's a very serious charge, but it did not come from a creationist. It has come from within the scientific community by one of the foremost evolutionists of our generation. And Dr. Lipson isn't anywhere near finished. Dr. Lipson wanted to know, in fact, he sort of wondered out loud, as it were, in his article, about exactly how well the theory of evolution has withstood all the testing to which we've been putting it over the years. And friends, think about this with me for just a moment. I would suggest to you this evening that is a very fair question for anybody to ask. Kindergarten through graduate school. And I'll tell you why. When Charles Darwin published the little book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, November the 24th, 1859, he stirred up a whirlwind of controversy that to this very day hasn't died down. We have spent multiplied millions and millions of dollars studying the concepts within that book. We have poured multiplied millions and millions of man-hours into the study of it. That being the case, I think it's a very fair question, don't you, for anyone to come along and ask, well, since we've now been studying this for 149 years, how well has the theory withstood the testing scientifically to which we've been putting it? Fair question, wouldn't you say? Dr. Lipson is going to give you the answer. Dr. Lipson says, I've always been slightly suspicious of the theory of evolution because of its ability to account for any property of living beings. I have therefore tried to see whether the biological discoveries over the last 30 years or so fit in with Darwin's theory. I do not think that they do. To my mind, said Dr. Lipson, the theory does not stand up at all. Friends, I'd like to remind you, this is not a statement from some wild-eyed fanatic creationist. This is a statement from an eminent evolutionist in a refereed science journal. And again, Dr. Lipson's not anywhere even close to finished. In this particular article, Dr. Lipson went on to explain that one of the most serious problems that evolutionists find themselves up against every single day is this problem. How are we going to get something that is non-living and inorganic to give rise to something organic and living? Do you realize that we have been studying that concept, the naturalistic origin of life, for literally 400 years? And I'm not exaggerating this evening. We have put the finest minds science has to offer on this problem for 4 centuries. We have had the most advanced technology, the most impressive methodology that science has ever been able to garner. And with all of that, with all the work of the human race, with all of our combined wisdom, with all of our technology and methodology, we still, to this very second, have not been able to get something non-living to give rise to that which is living. With all the design behind experiments, with all the fancy equipment, we still have failed and failed miserably. And yet we're asking students to believe in public schools that, well, somehow out in the early earth, it just happened. And Dr. Lipson seized upon that point. He said, I know what we've been telling all the kids because I helped write the books. He said, we've been telling the kids, well, there were some atoms out on the early earth, and natural forces took over, and radiation hit them, and bang, life just started. He said, we also know that is not right. We've tried it. Every conceivable way we've tried it. And I repeat, with even our intelligence of the human race behind well-designed, well-thought-out experiments, we still can't pull it off. Yet we're expecting children to believe that out on the early earth somehow it just happened? Dr. Lipson was very upset about this process. And in fact, after reviewing a number of these problems, he then asked this piercing question. He said, if living matter is not then being caused by an interplay of atoms and natural forces and radiation, how then is it coming into being? You've got to give him one thing. This guy really knows how to ask a penetrating question. And he's not bashful about doing it. First, he says, excuse me, after 149 years of us testing Darwin's theory, I, for one, would like to know how does the theory fit when you compare it to the actual scientific facts. And he says, I'm sorry, it doesn't fit well at all. And secondly, he says, how are we going to get life started upon the earth? Folks, let's face it. If you cannot somehow get something inorganic to go to organic, if you cannot get something non-living to go to living, and if you can't explain how it happens naturalistically, if you can't get it to live, you certainly can't get it to evolve. And that's Dr. Lipson's whole point. He says, I know how the experiments are supposed to work. We've been performing them and performing them and performing them, and we failed miserably at it. So he's had it. Up to here he's had it, and he says, would somebody please tell me then, if we didn't get here this way, how did we get here? Well, he's going to answer his own question. But before he does, he wants the reader of this article to dismiss from their minds any concept that hints of what he calls directed evolution. Now, my guess is that many of you in here tonight don't recognize that term, and for good reason. That's British English. That isn't American English. We don't use this term directed evolution very often in America. We have a different term that I think many of you in here will recognize that says the same thing. We don't call it directed evolution. We generally call it theistic evolution. It's the idea that there is a creator, but the creator he directed and he employed an evolutionary process to get you here. He did it, but he did it by evolution. And Dr. Lipson bristles at that thought, and he says, dismiss that from your mind. It isn't even under consideration. Why would he so dogmatically make that kind of a statement? Do you think it's possible it's because he has some sort of built-in bias against a creator? I'm going to show you in just a moment that isn't it. Friends, he's got entirely a different point he's trying to make, and his point is this. I mentioned earlier the man that many of you have heard of, Dr. Carl Sagan of Cornell University. Dr. Sagan died in December of 1996 of an incurable bone disease. But while he was here, he was one of the foremost evolutionists of our generation. And Dr. Sagan oftentimes, in print and through the media, made this one important point, that as he saw it as an evolutionist, you are here as the result of a blind, random, accidental set of processes that took place over billions and billions of years and that produced along the way billions and billions of organisms, but it wasn't a pretty picture. Because since there is no guidance, since it's all random, there were along the way mutants that were horrible. Two-headed calves, one-eyed fish that didn't make it. There were miscreants, there were extinctions, there were cul-de-sacs and dead ends and misfits. Folks, that's Dr. Lipson's point. If there were an intelligent creator behind this process, is that the kind of meandering, destructive, debilitative process that he would use? A process that is filled by design with mutants that don't make it, miscreants that don't make it, that's filled with dead ends and cul-de-sacs and extinction. No. That's Dr. Lipson's whole point. Don't, he says, try to convince me that evolution has some directing force behind it, because he says by definition it doesn't. And if there were an intelligent creator, and he had any intelligence, he certainly wouldn't use a process like this to get you here. It's wasteful, destructive, inefficient. It's a rotten way to do something. Well, Dr. Lipson, sir, if we didn't get here the way you've been telling all the kids in your classes at the British universities that we got here, if we didn't get here by some happy mixture of a little bit of evolution, a little bit of creation to make a theistic evolution or a directed evolution mixture, if we didn't get here by those two, how did we get here? Dr. Lipson's prepared to tell you. He says, I think, however, that we must go further than this and admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation? You can almost hear him gulp as he tries to get the word to come out, can't you? And you think that this makes this evolutionist, this scientist happy, that he's had to admit this in a refereed public science journal to all of his colleagues and the rest of the world? No. As a matter of fact, Dr. Lipson goes on to say, I know that this is anathema. In fact, he says it's accursed to physicists, as indeed he admits it is to me. But look at his concluding statement. But we must not reject a theory we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Did you feel that? That breath of fresh air in an otherwise very stale and age-old controversy? Dr. Lipson, sir, am I understanding you right? You don't even like creation. You've spent your whole life opposing it. And all of a sudden now you've come to the forefront in a science journal to say, whoops, excuse me, it looks like from all the data we've been able to assemble, we must have gotten here by creation. Folks, what does he mean by that concluding statement? We must not reject a theory we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. He means this. Scientists are not supposed to accept or reject things based on their likes or dislikes. They're supposed to be on a search for the facts, for objective truth, for scientia, knowledge. Likes and dislikes have nothing to do with it, or at least they're not supposed to. Friends, let me tell you why I did not put this quotation up here tonight. Now listen to me very carefully. I did not put this quotation up here to make you think, wow, all the evolutionists have turned tail and they've become creationists. No, that isn't true. Friends, I didn't put this quotation here for that reason. I put this quotation to make two very important points. Number one, I wanted you to see there are some within the scientific community as evolutionists who are willing finally to admit things aren't going well for us. The things we thought supported our theory don't. The facts we thought we could fit in, we can't. And you're probably sitting there wondering, I know I would be if I were you, is this guy alone? Is he an anachronism, a throwback to an earlier age? Is he just senile? Has he lost his mind and he's babbling on? Folks, none of those is the case. Dr. Lipson isn't babbling on. He hasn't lost his mind, and he's not alone. If I had time this evening, I could literally keep you here till midnight showing you these kinds of statements from evolutionists out of the scientific literature that are making exactly the same point. In fact, some of you in here will have heard the name of Sir Fred Hoyle, the renowned British astronomer and astrophysicist. In fact, if you're sitting in this auditorium tonight and you're over the age of 30, I notice some of you certainly are, you were taught, as I was, Dr. Hoyle's steady state theory of the origin of the universe. He was knighted by the Queen of England for his work and achievements in this particular arena. Folks, he's one of the ones who gave us a theory of the origin of the universe from an evolutionary viewpoint. Now, today, it's not accepted any longer. In fact, Dr. Hoyle doesn't even believe it. It's been kicked out and replaced by the currently popular Big Bang theory that you've heard so much about. But Dr. Hoyle gave us the steady state theory of the origin of the universe. He's a renowned evolutionist and atheist. But I want to show you a statement that Dr. Hoyle made recently. Shortly after Dr. Lipson made his comment, Dr. Hoyle made this comment. He said, once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make it absurd, it seems sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics upon which life depends are in every respect deliberate. In fact, says Dr. Hoyle, it's almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect a higher intelligence, even to the extreme idealized limit of God. I happened to be in Great Britain giving a series of lectures when he made that statement, and the English newspapers had gone crazy. They had big, tall letters. on the front pages of morning and evening editions that said literally, "Scientist says there must be a God." I heard a radio interview with Dr. Hoyle, and the interviewer was incredulous. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, and he asked Dr. Hoyle, he said, "Dr. Hoyle, you're one of the foremost atheists in the world. You have been knighted by our own Queen for giving us one of these atheistic theories of the origin of the universe. And now all of a sudden you think there may be a God?" And Dr. Hoyle's response was immediate. He said, "Sir, let me put it to you this way. I am now actively searching for the guiding hand of the Creator." Why? Folks, why would a man of his stature make this kind of statement? And by the way, these two men are not alone. If I had the time tonight, I could show you statements out of, for example, the book that was published several years ago by Dr. Pierre-Paul Grosset, France's greatest living zoologist. It's called The Evolution of Living Organisms. And in that book, Dr. Grosset says, as an evolutionist, our duty has now become to destroy the myth of evolution we have so carefully constructed. Dr. Michael Denton, Ph.D., MD of Australia, molecular biochemist. Dr. Denton published a book several years ago called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. In that book, 400 pages almost of a hardback book, Dr. Denton ended the book by, in essence, saying this: "I don't know how we got here. All I know is apparently we didn't get here by evolution." And he is an evolutionist. Friends, these kinds of statements are literally coming out of the woodwork. My question to you tonight is this, and this is my second point for putting these quotations before you. My second reason. Why are these men making these statements? You heard what Dr. Lipson said. He said we must not reject a theory we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. My question to you tonight and all weekend is going to be, what evidence? What evidence do you think these men have seen that has been so powerful, so overwhelming, it's causing them to make these kinds of statements in the scientific literature? And folks, I'd like to remind you, these men who are making these statements are not some beginning instructor or assistant professor. These are men who have literally made it all the way to the top. They're at the zenith, the peak, the apex of their professional careers. They hold earned doctorates from accredited universities. They hold endowed chairs at the universities where they labor and toil. These are the men who've literally written the books on this material, literally. And all of a sudden now they're beginning to say, time out, this isn't working anymore. Why? I'd like to show you some of that evidence right now. I think you're going to find it absolutely fascinating. And to introduce it, I'm going to make a statement that I realize right up front, on the face of it, is very, very simplistic. In fact, the statement is so utterly simplistic that when you hear me make it, some of you in here are actually going to be tempted to laugh out loud. And if you want to do that, be my guest. Won't hurt my feelings one bit, I promise. Here's the statement. Did you know that if the universe were not here, you wouldn't have to offer any explanation as to where it came from? Isn't that a pearl? Kind of makes that drive from Nashville worth it, just for that one little piece of wisdom tonight, doesn't it? Folks, of course, if the universe weren't here, you wouldn't have to worry about where it came from, because neither you nor it would be here to worry about it. But we all recognize, don't we? That's a moot point. Because you and the universe both are here. You know what that means? At some point in their life, every sane, every rational human on this planet is ultimately going to have to ask and answer this one question. How did the universe get here? There are only three options. Take a look at them. Option number one. Maybe the universe, and tonight when I use the word universe in this particular context, I'm using it to mean everything in a physical sense we know to exist. All matter and or energy. You may be aware that under certain of the laws of physics, matter and energy are interchangeable. Maybe the universe, everything we know to exist in a physical sense, maybe it is simply eternal. It has always and forever been here. It will always and forever be here. It's just eternal. Or maybe it's not. Now, folks, if for whatever reason the universe turns out not to be eternal, there is one thing you know with certainty, isn't there? If it's not eternal, by definition, it had to have had a beginning of some kind. Maybe this is how it began. Maybe the universe is not eternal. Maybe, in fact, in the distant past, there was absolutely nothing. Nothing but nothingness. And out of sheer nothingness, the whole universe just popped into existence of its own accord. Out of nothing. Or maybe it didn't. Now, friends, follow this very carefully. Maybe the universe is eternal. Maybe it's not. If it isn't, then you know for sure it had to have a definition. It had to have a beginning of some kind by definition. Maybe it just popped into existence out of nothing of its own accord. Maybe then it didn't. If it didn't, maybe the universe was created by something or someone that is both anterior to, that is existing before, and superior to, that is greater than the universe itself. Try this evening to think of a fourth option. You can put subheadings under each one of those if you'd like. But folks, that expends all the options. Either it's eternal or it's not. If it's not, it had to have a beginning. Maybe it began from nothing because of no reason at all. It just happened out of nothingness. Or number three, if neither of those first two is correct, maybe the actual truth is the universe was created by something more powerful than, preceding it. Do you realize the problem we're up against tonight in science? We now know scientifically that two of those options are wrong. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've already mentioned to you tonight the names of Dr. Carl Sagan, Sir Fred Hoyle. I'd like to show you a quotation or two from a man who certainly is at the same level of those two gentlemen. He is an astrophysicist in America. His name is Dr. Robert Jastrow. Some of you may have read his books. Dr. Jastrow is a prolific writer. He has the uncanny knack of being able to take something that's very complicated scientifically and breaking it down for the man on the street so it easily can be understood. Dr. Jastrow is the founder, the former director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, professor at Dartmouth, professor at Columbia, and so on and so on. Several years ago, he wrote two books. One of them is called God and the Astronomers. The other one he titled Until the Sun Dies. The quotations you're about to see will be documented to one of those two books. But before I place the transparencies on the machine, I want to say something to you out of a sense of fairness, both to Dr. Jastrow as the author and to you as the listener. In the very opening passage of these books, Dr. Jastrow says to the reader, and therefore I wish to make sure that you understand, in matters concerning religion, he is an agnostic. He does not believe in God. That stated, I'd like you to see his comments. Dr. Jastrow says, the universe is the totality of all matter, animate and inanimate throughout space and time. If there was a beginning, what came before? If there is an end, what will come after? Now he admits, on both scientific and philosophical grounds, the concept of an eternal universe seems more acceptable than the concept of some sort of transient universe that just springs suddenly into being and then fades slowly into darkness. Astronomers, he goes on to say, well, we try not to be influenced by philosophical considerations. However, the idea of a universe that has both a beginning and an end, he admits, is distasteful to the scientific mind, and in a desperate effort to avoid it, some astronomers have searched for another interpretation of the measurements that indicate the retreating motion of the galaxies, an interpretation that would not require the universe to expand. Why? He tells you why. Because if the evidence for an expanding universe could somehow be explained, then the need for a moment of creation would be eliminated. And the concept of time without end, an eternal universe, would return to science. Well, Dr. Jastrow, sir, that's all well and good, but what we'd really like to know tonight in McMinnville, Tennessee is, have you and your astronomer scientist colleagues successfully pulled that off? Oh, no. He says, as a matter of fact, our attempts have not succeeded. And now most astronomers have come to the conclusion they live in an exploding, expanding universe. Well, Dr. Jastrow, what does that mean? Oh, he's going to tell you. He says concurrently, there was a great deal of discussion about the fact that the second law of thermodynamics applied to the cosmos indicates that the universe is running down like a clock. If it's running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. Let me tell you why I have that sheet of paper over the quotation. Do you know what point in the lecture we've come to? Folks, this is the point in the lecture where some sweet little old lady sitting out there beside her husband of, lo, these many years, leans over into him very carefully, and with an elbow as sharp as an ice pick, does this. Right in the rib cage. And once she has his complete and undivided attention, she then whispers into his ear something that goes like this. You see, I told you this was going to happen. We were going to go down to that building on Friday night to hear this guy talk about creation and evolution, and he was going to start throwing out those block-long, polysyllabic scientific terms that nobody understood, and it was going to be a complete and total waste of our whole night, and here we are. Friends, if that's what you came thinking tonight, I'd like to set your mind at ease. Please, don't be put off by the big words. I well remember what one of my professors years ago tried to get over to me, and I hope did successfully get over to me. If the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. You gave me 1 hour of your time tonight. You're not ever going to get back. I don't plan to waste 1 second of it. Please, don't be put off by the big words. I think almost everybody in here, practically from the youngest to the oldest, knows what Dr. Jastrow's talking about, but you don't likely go around using these terms to express it. Let me put it in common parlance for you. There are in physics 4 what we call laws of thermodynamics. Their name implies thermo, heat, dynamics, movement. They have to do with heat and energy transfer. Only the first 2, the first and second laws of thermodynamics, come to bear into the creation-evolution controversy, but here they're very important. See if you recognize the first law. It says this: in nature, neither matter nor energy may be created or destroyed. We've all heard that before, haven't we? And folks, it's deadly true. In nature, you can't create or destroy energy or matter. Somebody says, well, wait a minute. Here in Tennessee, we get real cold winters, lots of snow, and on a Friday night, I take a big old chunk of wood, I drop it into the fireplace, I light that thing with a match, and I stand there and warm myself by the heat that emanates off of it. Created a lot of energy, didn't I? No. Folks, you didn't create any energy. The energy is already in the piece of wood. It's in what we call potential form. When you struck the match to it, you changed it into what we call kinetic or useful form. But you didn't destroy anything or create anything. The energy was already there, and it's still here. Part of it came out at you and warmed you. Part of it went up the flue. Part of it is trapped in the ash under the grate in the fireplace. Folks, you didn't create or destroy anything. All you did was change the form of it. Somebody says, well, what about when we split an atom? We create a lot of energy. No. The energy's already there. You don't create it. All you do is split the atom and release it and hopefully control it. But folks, we don't go through life creating or destroying energy or matter. All we do is change their form. And that's where the second law comes in. The second law, to which Dr. Jastrow is alluding, says this: energy is becoming less and less available for us to use. Why? Because as we go through life, we change it from a usable to a non-usable form. What's going to happen when all the natural gas is gone off the oil fields? Well, you say, that's not a problem. We're going to use the oil. Okay, I'll play along. What happens when all the oil's gone? Oh, we're going to use the coal. And what happens when all the coal is gone? Anybody see which way this is going? Friends, can you go to the gas station with your car, pump that tank full of gasoline, then before you leave, take you a big old sturdy, stout rubber hose, hook it on the muffler, run it back to the engine, and just from then on merrily keep going your way? You wish. But it isn't going to happen, is it? You see, folks, when we transform the energy, we send it from a usable, oil, coal, gasoline, to a non-usable form. Smoke, fumes, particulates, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. Wait a minute. That's Dr. Jastrow's whole point. He says, you know what the second law of thermodynamics makes this thing look like? It makes it look like some kind of giant clock. Somebody came along at the beginning, wound that thing up, and ever since it has just slowly been ticking ever so quietly to a halt. Sir Arthur Eddington, says Dr. Jastrow, the most distinguished British astronomer of his day, wrote, if our views are right, somewhere between the beginning of time and the present day, we must place that winding up of the universe. Dr. Jastrow then says, when that occurred, and who or what wound up the universe, notice the capital W on the word who. I did not put that there. That was in Dr. Jastrow's book, just as you're seeing it. Who or what wound up the universe? Oh, says Dr. Jastrow, now those were questions that bemused theologians and physicists and astronomers, particularly back in the 1920s and 1930s. But, says Dr. Jastrow, most remarkable of all is the fact that in science, as in the Bible, the world begins with an act of creation. And he admits that view hasn't always been held by scientists. In fact, only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence that the world has not existed forever. It began abruptly, without apparent cause, in a blinding event that defies scientific description. It did what, Dr. Jastrow? It began. Dr. Jastrow, what's the implication of that? Again, he'll tell you. Dr. Jastrow says this lingering decline predicted by astronomers to the end of the world, folks, that's his reference to everything slowly running down under the edict of the second law of thermodynamics. Oh, he says, now that's a whole lot different from the explosive conditions they've calculated for its birth. That's his reference to the so-called Big Bang theory you've heard so much about. He says, however, it doesn't matter. The impact is the same. Dr. Jastrow, what's the impact? Modern science denies an eternal existence to the universe, either in the past or in the future. Friends, I could not put it to you any simpler if my life depended on it. Modern science denies an eternal existence to the universe. Why? Think about it. Name for me two qualities eternal entities don't have. They don't have beginnings and they don't have endings. Why? Because they're by definition eternal. The universe had a beginning, Dr. Jastrow said, and it's going to have an ending. Folks, eternal entities don't have beginnings or endings. This universe is running down. Do eternal things run down? No. By definition. In fact, if you want to show somebody from a very practical standpoint how we know the universe isn't eternal, ask any evolutionist this question. How old is the universe? They'll give you an answer out of the textbooks. Well, we think it's somewhere between 15 and 30 billion years old. Do eternal things have ages? No. You can't date something if it's eternal. If you're going to date something, it has to have a beginning. They have dated the beginning of the universe. Folks, you will not find a scientist within 1 million miles of McMinnville, Tennessee, if he's kept up on the literature of the last decade and a half, who will look you in the face and try to tell you the universe is eternal. We know today it is not. Option number one is wrong scientifically. Throw it out. What about option number two? The universe just popped into existence out of nothing. When I said that a few moments ago, I couldn't help but notice some of you in the auditorium sort of quietly sitting there and shaking your head left to right thinking, you're going to get the universe just to pop into existence out of nothing of its own accord? That is exactly what scientists of late have begun to suggest, as odd as that might strike you tonight. Friends, once the eternal universe was debunked, this one all of a sudden became real important. May 1984 edition of Scientific American magazine. Two evolutionists, Drs. Guth and Steinhardt, wrote an article called The Inflationary Universe. You know what something does when it inflates, right? Goes from very small to very large, generally pretty quickly. That's exactly what they say happened to the universe. Take a look. They say from a historical point of view, probably the most revolutionary aspect of the inflationary model is the notion that all the matter and energy in the observable universe may have emerged from almost nothing. Now wait, they're not through. They say the inflationary model of the universe provides a possible mechanism by which the observed universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. Or they say, it's just tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. Friends, let that sink in. That this whole universe, filled with over 1 billion known galaxies. This whole thing, that if you could travel at the speed of light, 186,317.2 miles per second, it would take you 20 billion years to cross just the diameter of this universe. This whole thing just popped into existence from nothing, literally nothing. Do you have any earthly idea the impact that's going to have on almost every area of science? When they suggested this in May of '84, this was the topic of discussion at scientific meetings worldwide. Scientists were huddled in corners. Scientists were making presentations about it. It was big in the news media. It was big in the scientific media. It was big in the popular science media. In fact, one of the popular science magazines that was published then, but no longer is, a magazine called Omni, sent one of its investigative reporters to interview Dr. Guth, one of the developers of this unusual theory. That entire interview was published in November of 1988. I want to show you tonight just a small piece of that interview. The interviewer asked Dr. Guth this question. Dr. Guth, how big was this very early pre-inflation universe? Excuse me, does anybody in here besides me see something wrong with the question? Folks, time out. Suppose this lecture were over. We're all standing in the foyer just chit-chatting and talking and having a good time. And one of you spots me across the foyer and you walk over to say something to me. But as you draw closer, you can't help but notice that I'm standing over in the corner of the foyer like this. Well, you being the naturally curious person that you are, you slink over a little closer, and finally, when you're within voice range, you say, "Excuse me, Dr. Thompson, what have you got there?" And I look up at you and say, "Literally nothing." And you say, "How big is it?" Which one of us are they going to cart off? It's not going to be me. They're going to take you and put you in a rubber room where you go blah, 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 all day long. What do you mean, how big is it? I just told you I had literally nothing. You heard what Dr. Guth said. He said the whole thing evolved from literally nothing. Then the reporter comes along and says, "Well, before that, how big was it?" And Dr. Guth's response was, "It was amazingly small." In fact, says Dr. Guth, it was so small, it was 10 to the minus 24 centimeters across. He knows you're not going to know what that means. So he's going to put it into more elementary terms. In other words, the whole universe was smaller than the size of a single proton. And just as amazing, he goes on to say, is this fact: it would have contained only about 25 pounds of matter. Time out again. Lecture's over. We're standing in the foyer, chit-chatting, having a good time. One of you walks over to me just as a gentleman or a lady to shake my hand. So you extend yours, but instead of me being a gentleman and extending mine, I reach around behind my leg where you can't see it, grab a ball-peen hammer that weighs exactly 25 pounds, and smack you up the side of the head with it. When that ambulance driver comes and loads you unconscious onto that gurney, gets you down to the local hospital, and you finally wake up as he pushes you in, what are you going to do? Look up at the doctor in the emergency room and go, "It's okay, Doc. He hit me with 25 pounds of literally nothing." Oh, no. Friends, there's a whole lot of difference, isn't there, in 25 pounds and literally nothing. Does anybody see what's happened here? We've come full circle. We're right back where we started. Dr. Guth, I don't care if it has 25 pounds of matter. I don't care if it has 25 ounces of matter. I don't care if it has 0.0000025 nanograms of matter. Where did that matter come from? Is it eternal? Did it create itself out of nothing, or was it created? Friends, we're right back where we started. I've got to ask the same three questions all over again. In philosophy, this is called begging the question. You just assume what you're supposed to prove and then go merrily on your way as if you somehow had proved it. You think I'm going to let Dr. Guth get by with it, and you don't think a man of his obvious intelligence knows there's something rotten in Denmark? Oh, yes. Dr. Guth knows. In fact, look at this statement that was at the end of the interview. Dr. Guth says this. He says, in the end, I must admit that questions of plausibility are not logically determinable and depend somewhat upon intuition. Could I translate that for you? He's saying, I couldn't prove this to you if my life depended on it. I just hope this is what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, that's the nice thing about living in America. No, really. Land of the free, home of the brave, mother Chevrolet apple pie. You can believe anything your little heart desires. You can believe, if you want to, that Elvis Presley is still alive and living in the Bermuda Triangle. It's a free country. You can believe anything you want, but you can't teach that to our children as science. Science is based upon experimental reproducibility and observation with the five senses. This isn't. Folks, this is a pie in the sky, I hope so, by and by kind of theory, without a shard of evidence to support it. And in fact, it violates one of the most precious, one of the most treasured laws of all of science, the first law of thermodynamics, which specifically says you cannot create energy or matter in nature. If you've got no energy or matter, what are you always going to have? No energy or matter. This theory, by the way, in case you're wondering, was thrown out. Even Dr. Guth doesn't believe it anymore. It was replaced by a theory that his co-worker, Dr. Steinhardt, and a Russian scientist, Dr. Lind, worked on, called the new inflationary model. But, as Dr. Stephen Hawking of Great Britain says in his book, A Brief History of Time, I'm sorry, the new inflationary model is now dead. But, fear not, because Dr. Hawking in that same book said he's going to replace it with the chaotic inflationary model. And so on, and so on, and so on. Folks, it doesn't matter what fancy moniker you attach to it. The basic thrust of it is still the same. How are you going to get something from nothing in nature? In light of the first law of thermodynamics, you're not. Period. Sit quietly by. You're going to see this one go the way of all things. It's going to pale into insignificance, and that's going to leave you with only that third option. Take a look at it. I'd like you to know tonight that it is a self-evident truth that nothing comes from nothing. But friends, that has a tremendous implication. If in the distant past you had nothing, and if according to the first law of thermodynamics nothing comes from nothing, what would you now have? Nothing. But you don't. You've got people and plants and pews and planets and a whole lot of other stuff. You know what the implication of that is? If there's something here now, something has to have existed forever. The only question is, what's the something? If I were to put it into a logical argument, here's what it would look like. Everything we as humans know to exist, you can put into one of two categories. Matter, remember earlier I said that includes energy, they're interchangeable. and mind, or intellect. Now, you're going to be hard-pressed to find anybody that's sane and rational who can disagree with you on that statement. Think through this again with me. They heard you make the statement with their ears, or they saw you make it with your hands as you use sign language, but your hands and their ears are both made out of matter. They understood what you said because they have a mind that allows them to do so, an intellect, thought processes. If they disagree with you, either they don't exist or they're insane. Friends, I repeat, everything we know exists you can put into one of two categories: matter or mind. Now, years ago, some within the evolutionary community saw where this was going, and they didn't care for it one little bit. And so in order to attempt to cut it off at the pass, so to speak, they said this: mind is nothing but a function of the brain, which is matter. Therefore, matter's all that exists. It was a valiant attempt, but doomed to fail. And what doomed it was an experiment performed in the country of Great Britain by a psychiatrist by the name of Sir John Eccles. Dr. Eccles had spent a lifetime studying the physiological neural synapses in the brain. He wanted to know if there was some way to discern whether the brain and the mind might be separate entities. So he set out to document that experimentally, and he did. He devised a series of experiments that was finally able to document that the mind could actually be fired to do something by mere intention alone, without any electrical charge occurring between the neural synapses in the brain, indicating the mind was a completely separate entity from the brain. Folks, he wrote a big, thick 600-page book, co-authored with the renowned philosopher of science from Great Britain, Sir Karl Popper. It's called The Self and Its Brain. And tonight when you go home, if you have trouble sleeping and you're counting those sheep and that doesn't work, I'd recommend this book. This thing is heavy, literally and philosophically. But if I could break down to you Dr. Eccles' lifetime of research and the book to go with it into a simple, easy-to-understand analogy, here's what I would say to you. Dr. Eccles was able to document scientifically that the mind is to the brain as a librarian is to a library. The librarian may inhabit the library, control the library, use the library, but the librarian is not the library. The mind may well inhabit the brain, to some extent control, use the brain, but the mind is not the brain. The former is not reducible to the latter. Along the way, as he worked in this area and related areas, Dr. Eccles was awarded science's highest and most coveted prize, the Nobel. Friends, if you've got a scientist who's kept up on the literature of the last decade and a half, he will not try to tell you that the brain, matter, is all that exists. We know better than that today. But one of those two things is eternal. They're all we as humans know to exist: intellect, thought, mind, or matter, the opposite of it. But ladies and gentlemen, you know that matter isn't eternal because I gave you the evidence tonight from Dr. Jastrow and others. Matter is not eternal. The universe is running down. It had a beginning, it had an ending. It is not eternal. If matter and energy are not eternal, what then is? Mind. Call it whatever you want. Intellect, spirit, force, first cause, uncaused. We simply prefer to call it the Creator. that eternally existing, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent mind from outside the universe that has caused the universe to come into being. Folks, did you pick up on what Dr. Hoyle said a moment ago in his quote? He said, it is almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect in a valid way a higher intelligence, even to the extreme idealized limit of God. Folks, ask any scientist and he will tell you the foundational law of all of science and all of philosophy is the law of causality, the law of cause and effect. That law says this, and we know not a single exception to it. For every material effect, there has to be a cause. No. That's not what the law says. The law says for every material effect, there has to be an adequate cause. The river didn't turn muddy because the frog jumped into it. That is not an adequate cause. The book didn't fall off the table because the mosquito lives on it. That is not an adequate cause. Wherever you see a material effect, behind it, there is an adequate cause. And ladies and gentlemen, in all the history of science, in all of human history, we have never known an effect greater than a cause. Whenever you see an effect, there is a greater cause standing behind it. This universe is massive in size. Whatever caused it is bigger. It has extreme intelligence. The fact you're sitting here tonight listening to me talk about intelligence proves that fact beyond the shadow of a doubt. Whatever created this universe has an intelligence greater than the universe. Folks, you never get a law without a lawgiver. Never a painting without a painter. Never a poem without a poet. Never do you get design without a designer. We in science have stumbled across the evidence of that eternal, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent mind from outside the universe that created this universe. And if, by the way, you think that we as creationists are the only ones who've recognized this fact of late, you're wrong. I'd like to show you a statement Dr. Jastrow made several years ago after examining the very evidence you've seen tonight. He was interviewed by Christianity Today magazine, and in that interview, Dr. Jastrow made this statement. He said that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Bingo. Folks, I couldn't, again, put it any simpler to you than that. And I'd like to show you how Dr. Jastrow ended one of those two books I quoted from earlier. Dr. Jastrow said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself up over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Translation? Apparently, the creationists had it right all along. Exactly. Folks, now you know what Dr. Lipson meant when he said, we cannot any longer reject the experimental evidence, even if we don't like it. Dr. Jastrow is an agnostic and still making statements like that. Because the evidence of the Creator was so overwhelming, he simply, as a scientist, couldn't ignore it any longer. Tonight, as we close, I have a question that I'd like to ask. Did you happen to pick up on anything this evening within the lecture that was just a little bit out of the ordinary? especially considering where the lecture is being held? Did you happen to notice that during the lecture, except where the evolutionists used the words God and Bible in their quotations, and every quotation you saw tonight, without a single exception, was from the evolutionists? I did not use the words God or Bible a single time in the lecture. I didn't quote to you from any religious literature, including the Bible. But where does it inevitably lead you? Straight to a Creator. Question: what is there about the material that you just heard and saw tonight that would preclude it from being given to students in Tennessee public schools or any other state's public schools? Someone might say, well, you used the word Creator, and you can't do that. Oh, yes, I did, and yes, you can. Folks, you can use the word Creator in any classroom in America you want. You can even use the word God with a capital G, Creator with a capital C, and have no religious purpose or intent in mind at all. I can prove that to you real easily. When students go to study in their economics classes, and the teacher pulls out a quarter to tell them about our American coinage system in the light of economics, what does that quarter say on one side of it? In God we trust, does it? And when the students go to learn about the beginnings of our country, and the teacher tells them about how the Declaration of Independence was framed and passed, and the teacher begins to read that marvelous document to them and hits that part that all men are endowed by their Creator with a capital C? Yes. When they stand in an auditorium similar to this one in a public school before that beautiful red, white, and blue stars and stripes we call the flag of the United States of America, hand over heart, and say that Pledge of Allegiance about one nation under God, would anybody suggest that the American coinage system, our hallowed Declaration of Independence, our sacrosanct Pledge of Allegiance, that those things are religious artifacts? They're not. They're secular items, every single one of them. Yet they all speak of a God, capital G, and Creator, capital C. I repeat the question. What is there about the lecture you've heard tonight that would preclude it from being given to students in public schools? And the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely nothing. I know because I've presented to students in public schools this country over, length and breadth. And as much as the ACLU hates it, there's not a thing they can do about it, because it's straight out of science. But where does it lead you? Right to a Creator. I'd like to leave you to think about that tonight. To the students who came from biology classes, I'd like you to know this information. It's out there. It's in the scientific literature. But it's very likely you're never going to hear it in a public school in America. And I think this evening, ladies and gentlemen, that is terribly sad. Because it is neither good science nor good education to withhold a part or all of the facts from our students. That is not what science is all about. Science is supposed to be an objective search for the truth. It is not interested in bigotry, prejudice, or preconceived ideas. It is interested in teaching children how to think and how to come across, discover, learn, and enjoy those facts. This evening, as we close, I would like to express to each and every one of you my sincere and heartfelt appreciation for your having come tonight. I realize that in the spring of the year like this is a very busy time for you, and you could have easily been somewhere else tonight. But for whatever reason, you came here. And in doing so, you have honored me as the speaker, and I am deeply indebted to you for it. As we close, may I mention these 2 or 3 things to you very quickly. Number one, as you exit the auditorium this evening, if you will exit at the rear, turn immediately to your right. There are 2 tables back there that are full of free handout materials that go just with this lecture. And if you'd like a set of them, please take them. We have ample copies. You're welcome to them. But don't make this mistake. Don't think, well, I'm in a hurry, it's late, I'll get them tomorrow. They won't be there tomorrow. Tonight, after you've left, I'm going to put all those up, if any remain. I'm going to get out all new handouts for the lectures tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow, during the break, between the first and second lecture, I'm going to put all those up, get out new ones for the 3:30 lecture. Tomorrow, I'll put those up after that lecture, get out still more for Sunday's lectures. If you want them, if you'll pick them up by the end of the weekend, you'll have about a 2.5 to 3 inch thick stack of notebook-type materials that I think you'll find are very valuable. And I know one thing for certain. You cannot beat the price. So if you'd like them, they're there for the taking. As you exit the auditorium, if you turn to the left, you will find some materials there that are for sale. And this is the only time I'll mention them. And the only reason I mention them is to make sure you understand they're a part of our nonprofit work. I don't get a dime out of it, nor does anybody else. All we do is take the sales of the money from sales of this weekend, purchase more materials for the next place I'm going, which is a week from tonight in Parkersburg, West Virginia. If you would like to examine those materials, they will not change. They will stay out the entire weekend. There are materials for adults, materials for children. There are audio tapes and videotapes of the lectures and so on. One thing I am going to mention, because if I don't, I'm going to be asked, so I might as well go ahead and tell you. I noticed some of you trying to take notes, and the biology students probably were required to take notes if I know biology teachers like I think I do. And I know it's very hard. The lights have been dimmed, the transparencies go up, you can't see them. I'm often asked, do you have this material in print somewhere we can get a hold of it with